So this is the agenda for tonight. It looks very familiar. I'm going to review the draft preliminary report. We're going to talk about neighborhood outreach. I'm going to talk about future directions, but also, I'm sorry I didn't put it on here. Ron has asked to share us to review the document that he shared with the committee last week or earlier in the week and have a discussion about that. So that will occupy the second half of the meeting. I don't have a lot to say tonight, so I'm going to try to wrap it up around 7 o'clock and turn it over to Ron. So these are the boilerplate slides that we show at every meeting about what is a conservation district and how does a conservation district differ from an historic district. I've read these at every one of the last 12 or 15 meetings, so I'm not going to read them again. I assume if you're on the call that you're familiar by this time with the National Register of Historic Places and the study area boundaries that include the residential area of East Cambridge plus parks on the perimeter, but does not include residential in North Point or along First Street or west of the railroad tracks. So the big distribution this month was a complete version of the draft preliminary study report that we've been compiling for months, and I've been sharing in bits and pieces. So this month, I went through the entire thing from start to finish, made as much as I could, made the language consistent, edited out duplications, inconsistencies, and I'm presenting it tonight as a complete document. And I hope we delivered this physical copies to the commission study committee members last Friday and put it on the website. So I hope folks have had a chance to take a look at it. There's a summary, which is new. That's a one-page summary of the process and the recommendations so far. And that, of course, is subject to change because the study process is still underway. And I would ask if any study committee members have comments on that. I don't have a slide showing all that text, but I'll pause for a minute. And if anyone has anything to say about that, please chip in. And
hey Charlie, it's Ron Creamer.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, Charlie. Ron. Just a quick procedural point of order. You had emailed me a few minutes before the meeting tonight, and I responded. It's not clear that you got my response, so I just want to request, would it be possible, I hadn't planned on doing a presentation this evening, but I would like to refer the community to the report I did write that's on the website so that they could be reading through it the first hour. And if we get a chance to address the questions about it in the second hour, that way they'll be read up on it. I'm just wondering if we could refer them to that report now.
Yeah.
Give them time.
Yeah. Thank you, Ron. That's fine. I hope people read your piece over the weekend or before the meeting, but we'll definitely give time for folks to do that after I get through this part of the presentation.
And it's posted at the same address that's on the screen here now. It's all in the same webpage.
Yeah. So if you go to the City of Cambridge's website, to the historical department page, districts, historic properties, the East Cambridge NCD study. It's posted there for members of the public, but all the members of the study committee have received copies. And Ron, when did you send those out to the committee members? You're muted.
Yeah. Originally, I think it was over the weekend, Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I revised it and I sent the final copy to you on Monday.
Yeah. Okay. So it's been out. It's out there.
Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, we'll get there. So the summary is entirely new. It's based honestly on the language of the summary that would accompany the postcard poll, which we also distributed to study committee members before the weekend. It's just a version of that language. I'm not looking, let me make clear, I'm not looking for approval of any documents tonight. I just want to continue this discussion and encourage people to send in their edits, corrections, or comments or suggestions so that we can continue to perfect this. Part two, which is the preservation and development measures that goes in at enormous length into zoning and historic preservation measures of various kinds. I edited and clarified the analysis of the 2 years of interim jurisdiction. That's on page 39 of the printed version. Added some images to that. Part three on page 51, 50 and 51, entered the new goal 10 that talked about city council goals as we agreed last month. So there's no new language there at all. And then in part four, the guidelines for demolition, construction, and alterations, I added a section at the very end on page 62 about signs and discussed the provision of the Harvard Square Conservation District that transfers jurisdiction for some non-conforming signs from the planning board to the historical commission, which would allow signs that don't conform to the sign code. The current sign code allows 1 square foot of signage per each linear foot of frontage of a store commercial building. And so that typically is a fairly small sign and doesn't allow much creativity or visual interest that we associate with traditional signs like the live poultry fresh killed as a totally non-conforming sign, could not possibly be put up today without zoning relief. But we think the commission typically has taken the perspective that those signs do a lot to add to the commercial vitality of a street. And so where it's appropriate, we would like to request the city council's, we suggest that the study committee recommendation would be that the city council amend the zoning. So I've added, we had discussed that at several meetings, and I added that language at the end of the guidelines section. And let's see. The boundaries, I'll talk about that. No changes substantively. And then the recommendations, I think I'm going to jump ahead here. I have the goal statement and the secondary goals as they've been approved if people want to refer to them. And this is, oh, I'm sorry. This is the language about signs that I added to page 62 of the guidelines. This is in the version that went out last Friday and has been posted on the website since the weekend. Any comments so far? Questions? Okay, then the recommendations. This is, as we had discussed last month, that the jurisdiction of the NCD study, either the NCD commission, if it's established, while it's able to have jurisdiction over all publicly visible exterior alterations, new construction and demolition, there are categorical exclusions that are allowed, that are mandated by the ordinance. Maintenance, interior alterations, exterior alterations not visible from a public way, paint color, landscaping, reconstruction after a disaster, all are not subject to the jurisdiction of any neighborhood conservation district. Then the enabling ordinance has optional exclusions from review that the study committee can recommend. The application of exterior wall material, like siding, application of siding in a manner that doesn't require the removal or enclosure of historic features. The red lined language is something that I added, which was inappropriate in this location because these are exclusions that are in the ordinance and we can't modify their application in this way. Alterations to existing structures that don't increase or diminish the size and location of windows and doors, cause the removal of a bay, porch, hood, or window or door casing, etc. All those alterations would be approved without review. Signs, temporary structures, lawn statuary, recreational equipment would not be subject to review. Terraces, walks, driveways, sidewalks, similar structures substantially at grade level would not be reviewed. Storm doors and windows, screens, window air conditioners, lighting fixtures, antenna, trellis work, and similar appurtenances would all be excluded from review. And then we have the ability to recommend further exclusions from review based on local conditions and the study. So replacement windows pursuant to the Commission's guidelines, which say that original wood windows should be protected and preserved and protected by storm windows, preferably, and that windows that have already been replaced, which is probably the majority of the windows in East Cambridge, should be replaced in a manner that's consistent with the architecture of the building. New openings and foundations for windows and light wells would not be subject to review. Furnace vents, HVAC equipment towards the back of a house, skylights, solar panels, satellite dishes, antennae, again, replacement roofing materials, except we would want to review replacement of a slate roof. There are not many slate roofs left in East Cambridge, and the few that are, if they can be preserved or conserved, the Commission would like a crack at that. Replacement of wood gutters and exterior features unprotected from the weather with synthetics. We have guidelines for that. Exterior lighting, some of this is actually redundant, I guess, and electric vehicle charging stations, raised beds for gardening, walls and fences, alterations to commercial building facades and storefronts that uncover the original framework of the storefront intended to surround a storefront would be not subject to review, except that that the executive director or a staff person could evaluate a situation like this and authorize the project to go ahead without a public hearing or a commission review. And this is drawn directly from the Harvard Square Harvard Square Conservation District. Okay, and then I'm almost done here. For properties, so the jurisdiction, we had talked about binding and non-binding review. And the commission, the study committees determined that there would be two different classes of review, one for National Register properties and one for everything else. So for properties on the National Register, all new construction and demolition, and then alterations that don't qualify for an exemption. So including the application of exterior wall coverings such as siding, stucco, or paint on masonry buildings, on brick buildings, would be subject to binding review by the commission pursuant to the guidelines in Part 4. So I've added, that's basically the language that I took out of that previous guideline, because putting stucco or paint on a brick building, or God forbid, artificial siding on a masonry building is not a reversible activity, and is really destructive. And we haven't talked about this criteria, but many of the things we want to protect are activities we want to make sure are done properly, are activities that are not reversible, changes that are not reversible. So changes to windows and door openings, raising roofs, things like that are not reversible. The majority of the changes that we've exempted are reversible, and so we don't really need to regulate them strictly.
Hey, Charlie, I had a question about that slide. This is Ron Creamer. Can we go back to that slide?
Yeah.
So if we could keep that on the screen, I want to read from page 69 in the report. And I just wondering now if what I'm about to read is now obsolete. It says, the study committee debated whether to treat National Register buildings more strictly or than non-National Register buildings less so. A consensus emerged that all buildings should be subject to the same jurisdiction. Is this something new since that was written? Or are both true?
This is not inconsistent. The committee did have that discussion, sure. But
but here
basically
they are being treated differently.
Yeah, whether they're on the National Register or not, maybe that could be more clearly stated. But the type of review would be different whether a building was on the National Register or not. So the guidelines are the same, but some reviews are binding and some are non-binding, depending on the location or the status of the structure. The goals are the same. The secondary goals are the same.
Okay.
And Charlie, I have a question from what on that slide. What's in red was added or is subtracted?
It's added.
It's okay.
Yeah, this is something we did not discuss last time.
No, we didn't.
And it relates back to this exclusion.
Right.
So this language is directly from it's a quote from the ordinance, but I had improperly added this exception, which doesn't belong there.
Okay.
So I've restated that, the intent of that here, and put it here.
Great. Okay, I get it. Thank you.
And then that appears also here. for non-national register properties. There'll be binding review for all new construction and demolition. And then for the following categories of non-exempt alterations. So there'd be binding review of putting stucco ornaments. And then binding review of these other provisions, removal of exterior materials down to the sheathing, if that results in the changes to the appearance of historic details, changes to roof form, shape, or height, including the addition of dormers, replacement of a slate roof, changes to door and window sizes, removal or covering original door hoods or a cornice trim. So that's, let's see, that's almost it. And then, this is added to the recommendations section. This is another statement about signs. Or non-conforming signs. And let's see, I'm going to jump ahead, and because I'm basically done here, one more thing. At the very last page of the report, I put in this discussion of the discussion we had last month about whether to exclude these properties. And this ended up in the recommendation section. It should have been in the boundary, proposed boundary section, which is where we'll be moved to for the next version of the report. Okay. That's what I've got for the report. And as I said, I'm not expecting any kind of approval tonight. It's just too much material to digest. I'm still not convinced it's as clear as it could be in terms of exclusions and non-binding and binding. If there's a better way to express things, I'd really like to hear it. We may continue to work on that before the next meeting, but this is I think this represents the project. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm trying to reflect the discussion and the consensus that seems to have emerged, and the votes that we have taken on the East Cambridge NCD proposal. So if the committee ever gets, when and if the committee gets to this point, this report, with the addition of a draft ordinance, would be sent to the Historical Commission for a public hearing, and then the Historical Commission would review it and make its own recommendation to the City Council. In the meantime, we need to take a pause at some point and do some public, some reaching out to the public to explain the proposal and see if there is support for it in the East Cambridge community. That involves the idea we've had of a postcard poll, among other outreach methods. And I'd like to talk about that before I turn it over to Ron. But first, I'd like to hear if there's any more discussion from committee members or members of the public about the draft report as it stands.
Yeah, Charlie, Ron Creamer. I had three questions for areas of concern, maybe just need clarification on the latest draft. probably, we broached the first one. That is the language on page 69. And I'll tell you why that interested me and caught my eye, because as I read the introduction on the prelude II, the second page after the title, it was stated, throughout the study process, the committee has worked to ascertain the appropriate jurisdiction needed to protect historic resources without unduly burdening residents and property owners. So this was a sticking point for me, because I was there at a meeting when the exact language came up that we could avoid unduly burdening a whole swath of property owners and parts of the community. And the study committee decided that instead it was too late in the process and we should just leave everything as is, not really taking that into account. So my recollection is consistent with what you wrote on page 69, where you say that we debated one instance was Cambridge Street, another one was the jurisdiction and how we treat National Registry buildings versus non. And you do say a consensus emerged from the study committee that all buildings should be subject to the same jurisdiction. Basically, we did not try to limit unnecessary burden. So that was my experience. So I'm wondering if you could consider rephrasing in the introduction there what the study committee did, because it wasn't what I experienced.
Sure, do you have some language you'd like to suggest?
Well, maybe just strike it. You can say we struggled with, but we definitely did not always come down on not unduly burdening the community. I think it's misleading as written.
Well, I think that's debatable. I mean, we've spent a lot of time just now talking about all the things that are not going to be subject to review, and so that certainly has lightened the potential burden on, we hope, on a whole bunch of residents who would be allowed to do a lot of things without bothering with an application to the commission. So unduly, I mean, that's a variable. I guess that the meaning of that's in the eye of the beholder. But
what remains on everybody, though, that is not spared is the really time-consuming process that comes with a lot of hidden costs. So I'm just okay. If the committee is not willing to change the language, I wish I would reconsider.
As a member of the committee who's attended almost all of the meetings, I would say that we really did think about what was unreasonable in terms of asking residents, and we did try very hard to think about East Cambridge as a specific neighborhood and think about what the landscape of East Cambridge looked like. And I don't think that I feel pretty confident feeling that I did not feel like we were unduly burdening the neighborhood. So I would disagree with that characterization.
Gavin, do you remember the specific evening that we were talking about Cambridge Street? And Charlie proposed treating them differently because of the nature of the business. It was a BA zoning and primarily business area. And when it was broached, the idea was broached that we should have a different set of rules or treat that jurisdiction differently. One study committee member said it was too late, it was too much work. And then we moved on. You remember that evening?
I remember numerous discussions about Cambridge Street and numerous discussions about how Cambridge Street was being treated differently because it was a commercial district. I do not specifically remember anyone saying that it was too late to address a concern.
Okay.
I can't say that I have a perfect memory, but I don't have that memory.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's stuck in my craw.
Yeah. Bill?
Yeah, this is Bill Dines. I concur with Gavin. I think we spent a lot of time on this. We discussed Cambridge Street, and I recall that discussion, and I recall bringing up the significance of the amount of housing that's currently embedded within the Cambridge Street corridor, and it's probably more housing than commercial space. If you walk from 1st Street down to 9th Street or Fulkerson Street, you'll see more housing than actual commercial space. And we spent a lot of time on discussing that. And also, I think we have some historical data over the past couple of years where we had the interim rules from Harvard Square and the other conservation district. And I think almost 95% of the cases were just handled by staff within days in approved projects. There was only a handful of significant developments that actually had to go to a hearing. And I think we worked really strenuously on making the recommendations that we did to bring that forward and limit the necessity for every little modification or change or situation to go before a full hearing. And I think we're in good shape right now. And I can, again, concur with Gavin on and Charlie on that we should leave the language as it is.
Well, I think one thing that suggests to me is to qualify that assertion and try to be more specific here about the difference between what's being proposed and what a full strength conservation district would be, which I think is substantial. So Ron, I appreciate your pointing this out because it's not understandable, and it's certainly capable of it's subject to being misunderstood as it's phrased. So I'll take another crack at that.
Thank you.
Kevin, was that a hand up or?
I was actually just pointing out that Francesca has raised her virtual hand.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Francesca.
That's okay, Charlie. I was gonna say that I'm in line with both Gavin and Bill's stream of thoughts on this matter. I was also gonna ask a question. Ron, when you mentioned this is gonna add so much time to the process, can you quantify it?
I could give examples maybe in the second hour. Sure. I don't want to waste time on that now, but sure. Let's get into that in the second hour.
Yep, makes sense.
Charlie, I had a couple more points, if I may, on on the draft report, page 47. The very bottom, you're going through the narrative of what we've been through with the study. And you see how the very last paragraph, the very bottom of page 47, we talk about the initial meetings. We examined the architectural history. We went on the architectural tours. And then you talk about the suspension. On the very next page, we go right into what we pick up in September. In this narration, it doesn't anywhere point to the real contentious meetings, 3 meetings we had in the public, and the real severe lack of consensus, and things got pretty rowdy. And I'm just wondering why you left that out. And do you was it intentional? Would you consider, adding that to the narration? Because I think it's an important part of our history, is the beginning of the study.
Yeah.
Furthermore, Charlie, there's no even mention that I could see in the remainder of the report about any opposition at all to an ECNCD or the degree. And I'm just wondering why that's lacking in the narration.
I think that's implied in the description of the discussions the commission had about various things like excluding Cambridge Street, about excluding non-national registered areas. It's certainly, I agree, it's not here. And if the committee wants to add that, I certainly can. Those contentious meetings in 2020 were at the very beginning of the process. I mean, I think at that point we were still talking about history and talking about, what is historic preservation. So while they were memorable, I'm not sure that they conveyed much except perhaps an attempt to shut down the process and discourage the committee from going forward. So,
do you think part of it was community concern?
I can try my hand at recounting that and also summarizing the concerns that have been raised specifically.
I just don't think that we're giving an honest report if we don't include the community concerns that were expressed.
May I speak?
Of course.
Yeah, please.
So Ron, when doing this type of report, should we also report also the personal attacks that went on during that meeting, the breastfeeding, the screaming, and all those tactics that were used? Should those be part of the report? Because I don't think they really matter.
Well, I was there, Francesca. I don't remember the breastfeeding, but that wasn't what I was talking about. I was talking about the voices that
some
were very strong.
Some public members got accused and attacked. Some of the public members got accused and attacked personally. Should we also report that, or should we stick to what the matter is and talk about the planning in East Cambridge?
Well,
or do we need
I
to
think that if you're going to point out a couple issues that I'm not familiar with, but I don't dispute that they happened, but if you're going to point them out as a reason for blocking other valid community concerns, I don't think that's fair to the community.
I don't think reporting the offenses that went on is actually useful to the East Cambridge planning. It doesn't talk about architecture. It doesn't talk about planning. And
that's your word, Francesca. Offenses. That wasn't my word.
There were offenses that flew in that
community concern.
Meeting. So.
Well, I mean, I think Ron's correct that this does not specifically address any questions that were raised at various times. And we can certainly compile those.
Charlie, I think that if we're going to do that, then we got to cover some of these issues that Francesca's bringing up. I mean, we had opposition from several people calling the people that initiated this whole process greedy old white people that set this up for their own personal enrichment. Now, if we're going to deal with this stuff, we got to deal with it all, because I'm really upset about some of the vociferous opposition to this from outsiders that aren't even within the study group, without even being in the boundaries of the proposed conservation district. So if we're going to do that, then we got to make sure that these people or this subject is fully vetted and brought out. I just can't say there's significant opposition, because some of the petitions I saw floating around were from people that work in Cambridge. They don't even live in Cambridge, and they're voting against a conservation district that we're proposing. So it just is getting out of hand.
Bill,
I think if there's opposition to be made, then this could be made at the public hearing in front of the Historical Commission. Bring people in, they can express their opposition to the process. I don't think we have to go into great detail on what happened on those 3 meetings. There was actually only one meeting because the first two were basically introductions to what the proposed conservation district intent was and how it works within the city with the other 4 conservation districts and historical districts within the city.
Yep. Thank you, Bill. Paula?
Bill. Yes, I wanted to comment on specific issues that were raised. And I actually talked to 2 of the people who I actually know who were there. Neither of them live in the district, but they are affordable housing advocates and belong to various there are a couple of very activist groups. And so there had been some emails circulated inviting people to come to this meeting because the premise was that that this would be detrimental to affordable housing. And so actually had a fairly civil conversation about why this was really not the enemy of affordable housing. And I also think that if not at the last meeting, either the October or November meeting, I think there is language you could really look and review impact on on costs. We talked a lot about cost and whether it meant that properties would be more expensive, whether rents would be raised, or that sort of thing. And that was certainly why some of the people were at that last, I think it was March meeting, that Eric had to terminate early, but they were there to advocate for affordable housing and had heard that this was an attempt to squelch affordable housing or to prevent affordable housing from coming into East Cambridge. So if the language, it would be worth another read to see whether or not, I know that there's language that reflects the discussions that we did have about that. And Gavin has his hand up. It's hard to see the hands these for some reason.
Okay, Gavin.
So I would just say that I don't necessarily have a problem with saying that there was contentious discussions. There certainly were, but I don't want that misrepresented as a statement that everyone was speaking in opposition. You know, we've been meeting now off and on, mostly on for 2 years. And I've been surprised by the number of, even in the face of really often somewhat vitriolic attacks, the number of people who've spoken in favor of this. And the number of neighborhood groups and neighborhood residents who have come out and repeatedly spoken in favor of the conservation district. And if we're going to have anything that's stating that there was a conversation or a contentious discussion, it has to reflect both sides. It can't just be that there were people opposed to it. And like, honestly, these things are recorded, and the addresses of the people submitting the comments are typically stated. And if you wanted to make a real point of this, you know, you could certainly go through and you could figure out who was in the district and who was outside of the district and whether they were speaking in favor of it or against it. And I can say that having been in a lot of Zoom meetings about this, I have tracked that, at least in some meetings. And I found that typically the people who are in the district tends to be more likely to be supportive of the district, and people who are outside of the district tend to be more likely to be opposed to the district. And I don't have the data to back that up unless I dug through lots and lots of notes. But you know, it's all been recorded, so somebody can put that together if they want, if they'd like to.
Thank you, Francesca. You're muted.
Sorry, thank you. No, I think the hand up was still up from before. Somehow the system didn't put it down.
All right, well, let's hear from members of the public.
Mary Ellen, you can unmute yourself, please.
Hi, good evening. My name's Mary Ellen Doran. I live at 48 Spring Street. I've attended these meetings for 2 years. I've missed 2 meetings, the whole 2-year period. And I feel like my voice has not been fully taken on by this committee. I've spoken out in opposition to this. I've offered changes to this document, and the only change that has been made is the change to the sidewalks. And that was because you had to. Regarding the meeting at the beginning of this cycle, Eric Hill opened the meeting by saying that most of you in this room will not be able to provide public comment because there won't be enough time. We then gave him silence for 45 minutes and listened to his presentation. So this wasn't some crazy meeting. It devolved toward the end, but Eric Hill got the full and complete quiet of the room for his full presentation. And comments about breastfeeding just have to stop on this. I don't understand that. I just don't get it. But I don't support this. I still don't support this. I've attended all of the meetings and I still don't support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Thank you. Anybody else have a question or a comment? Yes, James Williamson, you can unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, well, thank you. I am happy to say where I live outside of the geographic district. My name is James Williamson. I live at 1000 Jackson Place in Jefferson Park in North Cambridge, which is so-called affordable housing. There were 3 meetings competing more or less the same time. And I thought, because I'm interested in this process in East Cambridge, because I know people who live there who are involved in many of the issues there and with the East Cambridge planning team over many years, I have seen East Cambridge as a particularly embattled and heavily burdened area, and have been troubled, sort of have felt sympathy for people who live there for what they must be grappling with the enormous, in my view, extremely excessive commercial real estate development pushing up against and into their neighborhood. So I tend to be sympathetic to trying to do something to protect the character, the historic resources of the neighborhood, and the things that people value. And I don't assume that those are all the same by any means for everybody. And I'm sympathetic to historic preservation. And I think we've got a city where those things we value have been, it's not just a recent thing, but have been under assault for decades. I was actually thinking that this might have been, it's coming very late for East Cambridge. As I was listening to some of this tonight, I was thinking, wow, wouldn't it have been nice if this had been initiated 20 years ago? It's kind of like really coming at the end of an enormous pressure and development and change. So good on you for trying to do something. I can't say that I have studied the specifics, but I did hear about, and many people I think in the city did hear about this, what was understood by many as a disruptive, as people sort of barging in and disrupting a meeting. Now, I wasn't there, I don't know, but it was interesting to hear some colloquy about that just now. When people talk about affordable housing, people talk about what bothers them. I get very bothered when people talk about what I now have come to call so-called affordable housing. It's used as a stalking horse by people who have never lived in it, who don't know, often really don't have the faintest idea what they're talking about. They don't know what it's like to live here in places like Jefferson Park, where I've lived for the last 15 years. They don't, they're sort of using it. I think many of the people who speak most loudly in recent years in Cambridge about this are people who basically have an ideological stance around market, what might be construed as market solutions to housing problems. And they want no restrictions whatsoever on the scale of building that can go on, regardless, in fact, of whether it turns out to be meaningfully affordable or not. So I think I just want to introduce another perspective on that, which is that there's at least, I think, notable disingenuousness when the words people yell about affordable housing, and what they're really doing is they want no restrictions on real estate and real estate development. And they've decided that any restrictions are inimical to affordability. And I think it's important to reintroduce the notion of community, of neighborhood. And those are important values which are lost in the diatribes about so-called affordability. And I say so-called affordability because they're going to tear down all the buildings where I live at Jefferson Park, the housing authority, and they're putting up new buildings with an additional density, over 103 additional units in a place where it's already very dense, and we are the ones who are living with the density, not others. And so I happen to think that's a mistake. But the cost per unit of the new development, because of some issues with it, which I think deserve investigation, interrogation, critique, alternatives, the cost per unit of the new development at Jefferson Park is over $906,000 a unit. I don't think you can call that affordable. And so thank you. I'm sorry I went on at some length, but I appreciate the work that you're doing. And I think you could have some narrative about the disruption and just try to do it so that it's accurate and fair. And I think the community as a whole would appreciate that. So thank you. Sorry to go on.
Thank you, James.
Okay, Mayor Lee Meyer, you can unmute yourself, please.
Hi, Marilyn Meyer, 10 Dana Street. This is really a fascinating discussion after the fact here. But I do have a question in the document itself. On page 10 of the document, but page 16 of the scroll, if you will, of that correlation, it talks about the 3rd District Court at 121 3rd Street, 1931, that has an uncertain future. Historic preservation projections should be in place before the buildings are deaccessioned by the state. Are they in jeopardy? Are they outside the national register? Or is this an extension? These buildings at the 3rd District Court are going to get more protection or protected, period? I don't understand that statement.
So the Registry of Deeds is in the National Register District and in the proposed Conservation District. The 3rd District Court is in the proposed Conservation District, but not on the National Register. The old Superior Courthouse and all the buildings on that block are privately owned and are in the proposed district. So the court system in Massachusetts has been reorganizing its physical assets now for many years. So, you know, what's now the Cambridge District Court is in, I think, Everett or Malden. Mm-hmm. The 3rd District Court on 3rd Street is, you know, the future is uncertain. And so is the Registry of Deeds. But both of them are protected one way or another.
They are protected one way or another. Yeah. So if it was in the conservation district, it would be helpful to protect those?
Yeah, I mean, without a conservation district, they'd be subject to the demolition ordinance. I can pretty much assure you that the Historical Commission would move to landmark at least the Registry of Deeds if it were threatened. I mean,
well, that alone takes the fabric and the stuffing right out of that area. Also, some of the zoning ordinances, I think we discussed at one point that some of the renter leases, some of the renters who are opposed to this, their leases have stricter criteria than the NCD, that renters should probably read their contracts for personal restrictions that are different, are more strict than what is being presented. Also, I mean, the fact that your report says that 93.7% of the permits were approved within 1 to 3 days, and of the 13 cases requiring hearing, 4 required a continuance. I mean, that is really a very good track record, and shows a flexibility. And I don't think the idea of undue burden on the community, it has been streamlined, it has been lightened up, it has been tweaked, if you will. And when I hear, no more burden to the community, I ask myself, well, where is the responsibility? Who has the responsibility for maintaining the conservation district if nobody wants to step up and take responsibility for the ordinances and the rules? And also, as far as contentious meetings, one of the statements early on was, I want to tear everything historical down and build new. That was the statement at one of the meetings. And it's like, well, why are you even here if you don't understand history and context? And you don't want any zoning whatsoever. So this is not the East Cambridge Conservation District is not as big as you think. And there are other opportunities. And because it's smaller workers' cottages, etc., that land is not as expensive as, let's say, Brattle Street, but there is still impact. But it's not, I live in Mid-Cambridge Conservation District, and talk to anybody here, and the rents are the rents. I mean, it is not impacted on whether it's a conservation district or not.
Okay, thank you, Marilee.
Yep.
Marie, you can unmute yourself, please. Marie Sacoccio.
Hi, Marie Sacoccio, 55 Otis Street. I was one of the victims at that meeting, and there were clips of me and Audrey Vetrano all over Twitter mocking us, describing our Italian accents. It was really outrageous, and it had a chilling effect on residents who are not used to publicly speaking. And I think it was meant to do that. That particular meeting, I was the one who mentioned the breastfeeding. And the reason I did was we were at the East End. There were 100 people crowded into this room that should have had 20 at most. It was the beginning of flu season and COVID. I had a woman next to me with 2 young children, I mean under 2, and she had her breast out and she was feeding the baby, who was screeching inches from my face. There was another gentleman who is from the neighborhood and appears at most of these meetings. He had his 2 children, probably under 2 also, who had meltdowns. They did not take their children outside. To me, it borders on child abuse. They brought their children there to disrupt. We had people in each corner of the room who were yelling about and trying to take over the room. We had Lauren Crow at the desk opposite Eric. Poor Eric was alone because Charlie was before city council. pounding, literally pounding and pounding on the desk until Eric finally stopped the meeting. Then Crow took over the meeting. He came with a pile of pamphlets. People took pamphlets. They thought they were from the city. That meeting was totally taken over. It's nothing I did. It's nothing Audrey did. It's nothing Eric did wrong. It was totally planned. I saw the plan put all over Twitter. There was a rallying cry to come and disrupt. So if you want to put that there was contention, I think Ron Kramer probably wasn't even at that meeting. That's what I think. It was outrageous. And I'll repeat what I said then. I have never experienced anything like it in my life, and I'm an attorney.
Thank you, Maureen.
Audrey Cunningham, please unmute yourself.
Okay, well, you can hear me okay, huh?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
Well, first of all, I totally agree with Marie. That was anyone that was at that meeting that was in opposition should be totally ashamed of themselves. They conducted themselves in an outrageous manner. And they don't seem to be held accountable to this. The second thing is, I am so tired of hearing that this has to do with affordable housing. It has nothing to do with it. And these opponents keep presenting this information as though it's fact, and it's not. And if the city council is so blind to believe the falsehoods, I mean, we are in big trouble. And, you know, I think somebody did try, like, first of all, kudos to the gentleman earlier who sounds like he is a voice of reason. And I believe some people did try to do this about 20 years ago, and it fell through. And we are besieged with development. I mean, I'm on Gore Street. I mean, Gore Street is just, I mean, we've been under siege for going on 4 years now with construction. But besides that, the development that's allowed to go on in the city without any consideration for the neighbors, people that live here, the property owners, the renters, it's just outrageous. And I am totally in favor of this conservation district. And I hope that when it goes to city council, that they will believe the facts. And again, it should be just property owners. You know, Charlie's bending over backwards to, you know, poll the renters and everything. By statute, I believe, and Marie can correct me if I'm wrong, it's supposed to be only property owners that make the decision whether it's conservation or not. But that's my say for the night. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Audrey.
Thanks, Audrey.
Suzanne Blier, you can go ahead, unmute yourself.
Thank you. Suzanne Blier, 5 Fuller Place. I just say at the outset that East Cambridge is a really critical part of the history of the city, which is about to celebrate its 400th anniversary officially. And I see this as a really critical move with that in mind, so that the next generations also can look to East Cambridge and see something of our rich history there. I live in a neighborhood conservation district and it works incredibly well. I work in another one and that works incredibly well. I go to both of those meetings and I live, you know, 30 feet from a historic district, and historic districts are very, very different from conservation districts. In a conservation district right near my house, a building was torn down with the support of the neighbors and the conservation district and replaced with a handsome contemporary one. That could not happen in an historic district at all. Appreciate the work of this committee a lot. I support the idea of signs. I think that's worked well in the Harvard Square Conservation District. On the affordable housing piece, what I ended up doing a study of Cambridge to show the impacts of conservation districts on increasing rental prices and land values, in part to disaggregate some of the misinformation that was being put out there. Also, recently, Senator Jalen and Lydia Edwards have come out to say the very best, least expensive, most viable, affordable housing is current housing, keeping people in these small and moderate homes that they live in now rather than tearing them down to build large structures. These are where the prices are naturally lower. And I agree with James on market solutions being problematic in so many ways, and particularly the lack of restrictions on development have been the brunt of some of these social media attacks. It's painful, I think, for all of us to see a city that has come to this point. And in part for that reason, I would love it not to be included. There's plenty out there on it, including many articles in things such as Cambridge Day. I come back to the importance of community and the neighborhood in this regard. The city as a community, the neighborhood as a real sort of beacon for how much they've been able to endure and their efforts in this light to bring a conservation district to preserve something of the history of their area. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Betty Sococcio, you're up next.
Hi, this is Betty. This is Betty Sococcio.
Betty, can you or Marie cut the other audio?
I know this is. Excuse me, I'm sorry. This is the problem when the two of us are on two computers. And last time when I went to speak, I wasn't allowed to speak at the last meeting because I think you people thought I was Marie and Marie had already spoken. So I do want to speak tonight. And what I want to say is about that great meeting that we had in that March, right before the pandemic, how terrible it really was, how it really was assaulting people verbally and even being put in such a physical confined space. It was just a terrible experience. And then it went on after that, attacking all of us who were present that day from East Cambridge. I guess we're not worth anything according to these other people who, you know, they see us as the people who have the neighborhood or grew up in the neighborhood. And we do value our neighborhood a great deal. That's why we're all here fighting so hard for this conservation district. We've seen much, much going on in our neighborhood. Audrey told you about Gore Street today. I certainly can tell you about the courthouse and what it's doing. And not only did we live through the courthouse experience once, we were here, what, 40 years ago when it happened originally. And we fought then and we fought again. And unfortunately, we did not come out as winners. And every day at 7 o'clock sharp, we hear the noise from that building. And then this street that I live on, Otis Street, and this is where this started from, the idea of having a conservation district, because two lovely houses in the neighborhood were really at the hands of developers. That's all they were. And they took away every molding, every crown piece, everything. And finally, we worked with Charlie, and Charlie can attest to this, so that one of the buildings could be landmarked, and we did get that landmark. But however, most of the construction would happen after noon on a Friday when they were going to tear down something. So the city closes down. So we have to wait till Monday. So Friday to Saturday, a lot happens, and a lot was destroyed in those buildings. So that's all I have to say, that I really am for this conservation district. I think it will help a great deal as I see developers coming in from here on Otis Street to other streets, including Cambridge Street. And developers have big ideas as to what they can do with these buildings, take every little detail off and leave us with just boxes. So the conservation district is something we really need. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. I don't see any more hands raised right now, Charlie.
Okay, Ron, I'm going to take about 5 minutes and just introduce the question of the postcard poll or the outreach.
Charlie,
And, and then
Charlie,
I'll get back to you.
Sorry. No,
yeah.
I'd rather steal from my own later time because I had one more question about the draft that we got through too.
Oh, sure.
If I may. Thank you. And just want to tell everybody going back, you know, I heard you all, I was at that meeting. We, the study committee members, were kind of like up front with our name tags around a table. And I wasn't aware that it got that contentious. I'd be happy with what James suggested, Charlie, that if the narrative included a discussion of what happened, as long as it's not painted in such a broad brushstroke so as to dismiss, you know, legitimate concerns that I heard during those meetings. So,
got it.
Okay, the third question I had about the draft is about the value study, the costs, rents, and so forth. Let me get that. Okay, on page 39 of the report, there's a conclusion.
Yeah.
Okay, and you say, Charlie, studies of the effect of NCDs on property values and rents in Cambridge show that NCDs do not materially affect property values or rents. So I just wanted to say that, you know, first of all, this isn't my horse. What prices are, what rents are. I know it is for a lot of other people on both sides of the issue. I just want to be careful that we're being accurate, because I remember a study that night that included the web crawling of Craigslist ads for properties. And it was the methodology, the director of the study, I think he was in your community development department, admitted that it was not a scientific way of doing it, and that Craigslist was no longer used to advertise properties in general for rent. And further, that the remaining properties that were on Craigslist were biased towards one end of the market, kind of ignoring the other. So I just don't think it's fair for us. And I don't think we voted on this language, the study committee. I think that came from you, Charlie. So I'm asking you to consider changing your conclusion and putting some caveats in there. You could say it was inconclusive, but to say that they do not materially affect property values, I think is a stretch from what I heard that night.
Yeah, we'll go back, circle back to the community development statistician who helped us with this, and see if he wants to qualify that or how he would qualify that. So that's all I can say at the moment. Eric was responsible for putting this together with the CD staff and the assessors. So we'll circle back to that.
All right, thank you, Charlie.
Okay, moving right along. So when we do reach a consensus, if we do reach a consensus and the study wants to go ahead, a study committee wants to go ahead with a recommendation, then we think there should be a pause before we send the report to the Historical Commission. I imagine there would be an opportunity to present to the East Cambridge Planning Team. There might be other venues. Members of the study committee and people who are in support or opposed could take the opportunity to reach out to the neighbors and the parties of interest on any side of the issue. The major tool we've used before to take the pulse of the community has been what we call a postcard poll. It's a little bit more complicated than that. Because there are several communities of interest that are not necessarily reached by comprehensive mailing lists. So obviously property owners are required to be notified, and they are the people with the most most at stake in a conservation district because the conservation district affects property interests and values. Positively or negatively, that's an issue for property owners. There is a great deal of interest in the city politically now about involving renters and tenants. And so for practical political reasons, we've got to make an effort to reach them and the neighborhood also. So there are three possibilities. One is a mailing to the assessor's list of property owners. The second is mailing to the Election Commission's list of registered voters. And the third is to put out a mass mailing through the post office's Every Door Direct program. So each of these has pluses and minuses. Property owners, of course, does not necessarily include all residents. Registered voters may include many property owners, but may not include all residents. The Every Door Direct method of the post office is organized by letter carrier routes, and the letter carrier routes that cover the study area in East Cambridge include North Point and some streets west of the railroad, of the tracks. And so I don't have a percentage, but a substantial number of those mailings would go outside the neighborhood. So what we're suggesting is doing two polls, one to property owners and one by Every Door Direct. They'll be tabulated separately so that we can understand, so we can interpret the results based on which poll was used and which population is being polled. So we had sent out this as a sample of the Every Door Direct poll, and a version of this that went by first class mail to property owners would include those questions as a postcard, as a prepaid postcard. So in this case, there is the summary on one side, and we've asked three questions, or well, three main questions, asking people to identify themselves, whether they're property owners, whether they live in the district, whether they live there but don't own property in the district, in the study area, or whether they don't live in the study area at all. Just a simple yes or no in favor of the NCD, and any comments or suggestions. So this is one sheet of paper that gets folded in half and gets delivered to every single household on the letter carrier's routes that cover the study area. The version that goes to property owners would have the same summary and the same questions, but they'd be on a postcard. So we're probably quite a ways away from this, but I just wanted to share this preliminary work that we've done, and we can circle back when we get closer. I'm certainly happy to take suggestions or comments at the moment, but I just wanted to get that out there as something we'd be looking at doing in the future.
Hey, Charlie, I would like to talk about the poll.
Okay,
with you and the study committee members.
Okay, shoot.
Well, first of all, do we know how many people live in the study area? There was a number, 3869 of dwellings, but do we have a good idea of how many people live here?
I'm not sure that the census has broken out yet. The 2020 census is, I don't think it's available yet. I don't remember offhand.
More along the methodology. Can you tell us how you intend to interpret the two different polls? Somebody said you really should only take into account the property owners, but there's a political interest in finding out what the renters get, and I understand that. But can you tell us the methodology, how we're going to weigh each poll, and or are we just going to do it and figure that out later?
Well, I think it's going to be evident. I mean, we're going to present you results from property owners, and then we're going to present you results of a mass mailing that could also include property owners, but is likely to include tenants who would not at all be represented on the property owner poll. So there's nothing beyond the facts of the population that's being, we don't have any way of refining the results from the mass mailing.
No, but are we bound by law to only take into account the property owners' wishes?
The law says we have to notify property owners.
Okay.
It doesn't say we can't take into account other people.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Charlie, back in 1975, you write in the narration about a failed attempt to do a historic district in East Cambridge, not a neighborhood conservation district. Can you just spend a minute on what you know about happened then and how it became clear to the study committee or the CHC to give up on the historic district?
Yeah, that's when I had all my hair and I was a lot younger and more energetic than I am now. It's actually just after I started here, and the Historical Commission decided that East Cambridge was eligible for a historic district, and we had a member, Hugh Lyons, who was a letter carrier, a longtime East Cambridge resident, although at that time he lived on Marcella Street, just across the tracks. And so he urged us to initiate a study, and we did. We got a study committee that included a number of East Cambridge folks, Joe Shaleski and the owner of the funeral home on Cambridge Street,
Rogers,
I think was a member. Yeah. And we took it to the neighborhood. We had a similar process, and it was intensely controversial. It turned out to be an election year, 1975. And over the summer, this became an article of debate among city council candidates. So we had some raucous meetings that approached the volume of our March 2020 meeting. And in the end, the Historical Commission decided that the public support wasn't there, and so they withdrew, and wound up without any conclusion or recommendation to the City Council.
And at that time, Charlie, there was no talk about doing a postcard mailing. You felt that you didn't have to, you kind of knew in your gut?
I don't think we ever got to that point, and the postcard mailing was an idea that came along much later when we were beginning to discuss conservation districts. I think the first postcard mailing we did might have been for mid-Cambridge in about 1983.
Thanks.
So
I met with, I'm sorry, go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, so the postcard poll is just it's a device we came up with to try to take the pulse of the neighborhood. It's nothing required by any means. But, the Historical Commission, before they send something to City Council, they're looking to see if there is anything resembling a consensus in favor of the proposal. Yeah, this is just one tool for measuring that.
Mm-hmm. I met with Eric on Friday before he went to Cancun, and he was in the neighborhood. He passed out all these packets to all of us, and he was regretting the lack of space that you had on the summary letter. And I guess this letter can't even fit on the postcard, right? It realistically would only be in the mailing to all.
Oh, no, it would be in an envelope with a postcard.
Okay.
In the first class
okay.
mailing.
So that everybody will get the summary letter.
Oh,
so
yeah,
I guess
everybody gets the same thing.
I'd like to talk about the first draft of that letter. And I guess my first question is, how much room are you willing to give people, you know, a balanced view of people that kind of want to go slow or might have issues? There might be some issues with having an historic or neighborhood conservation district in East Cambridge. Are you going to allow any space for that on this letter?
We could, you know, this is the space. If we
Golly, this is Bill. I think
mailing.
that's covered under the comments and suggestions on that mailing, right?
Yeah.
On the questionnaire and your answers. They could put in whether any of their concerns or any additional suggestions there.
Bill, that's not what I was getting at. What I meant was in the letter that CHC will be sending out, is there any room in there for people that want, you know, myself, for example, that may want to give another side, that we should maybe take these into consideration as you ponder? The reason why I say it is the first paragraph devotes 36 words to what the EC NCD would do. And then the second paragraph devotes 116 words to all the things it doesn't do. It almost feels apologetic and like a sales job. So I'm just wondering, how can we get through the process to make this more fair and balanced and realistic? You know, that says there are pros to an EC NCD, there may be cons to an EC NCD. And for further information, consult.
Yeah.
Because this is how you word this is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, obviously, I want it to be fair and balanced. But the space is the space. So, Ron, if you have a suggestion for how it should go, by all means, take a crack at it and see what you can say that would say what we have to say about what the proposal is, and take out or add whatever you think is appropriate, and we can debate that.
Okay.
You know, because it wants to be the collective voice of the committee. You know, remains to be seen, you know, exactly what the overall committee wants to include. But believe me, I welcome some actual language.
Sounds good.
Makes my work easier.
Okay.
Okay. Any?
Yeah, Charlie, this is Bill.
Comments. Yeah.
I just had a quick question. It appears that you eliminated the mailing to registered voters on this, or is that still up for discussion? Because I have some real problems with the every door direct, saying it encompasses probably a significant amount of people outside the proposed district that would be voting on this.
Yeah, you have to take it with a grain of salt, obviously. We went around and around in the office about this, whether we wanted to do all three mailings or not. And, you know, given, well, if the committee members want to come to the office and help stuff envelopes, that'd be a big plus.
Do we have any statistics on total number of households or people living in the district, and comparing that to the voting list? Like, would the voting list cover 90% of the households or whatever? Do we have that information available handy, or can we get that pretty quick?
Yeah, we certainly can get that. Yeah, absolutely.
Because if we know how many households we're sending to and how many households are registered to vote, maybe that might be an option versus the mass mailing to places outside the proposed district.
Yeah.
Just a thought. Well, I have some concerns with that mass mailing. And
yeah, I understand.
Just for a point of clarification, I would say that using registered voters, you're going to run into some, not necessarily the same issues, but similar issues that the boundaries drawn by wards and precincts aren't necessarily the boundaries that represent this conservation district. So you're actually going to end up with people outside of your district, whether you're using voter lists or the Every Door Direct. Also, in the past, when I used to work for a historical organization in Cambridge, we used voter lists frequently for mailings, and there's a high percentage of inaccurate addresses. And it's not anyone's fault. It's just that, people move, they don't update the voter registration, and that remains on the list. So you get, maybe like 15% back. So there's a lot of mail that you're sending out. And if in a district this dense, that's going to represent like thousands of pieces of mail that you'll get returned.
Yeah. So we don't have to decide tonight. We'll look up the numbers, Bill, and continue this discussion. I'd like to leave room for Ron, who's been talking to us for about 6 months about making a statement, and now he's back and he's ready to make a statement. So I don't want to run out the clock on him.
No, thanks, Charlie. I thank you for the time. I want to just tidy up here on the poll. To Bill's greater point, are you all concerned about one or both sides, the ability of them to gain this poll?
Yeah, of course.
What precautions have you come up with? Any systems to prevent the gaming of the poll?
I'm not going to discuss that.
Good. It's classified, huh?
I'm not giving anything away here. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Maybe the respondents,
for example, if
need to sign in blood.
If every renter said yes next to "I'm the property owner," that would really skew. And what if that was a campaign, for example? If people were photocopying them, and, it's just seems really easily gamed. The whole thing. And what are we really gonna? Is this how we're going to determine if there's consensus through these polls that are all imperfect?
It's just one part of the puzzle. I mean, it's everybody has their ear to the ground. It's just one piece of the puzzle. That's all it is.
What would the other pieces be, Charlie? Would they be would we take it to the public meetings? And
well, they're going to be public presentations. So if people start throwing rocks at us, then that's one gauge of public opinion. Social media is one thing. Gossip is certainly another one. Word of mouth. It all. We live in a pretty small town, so. There's no formula, there's no magic percentage. It's just, it's just a sense of probability, of plausibility that we're looking for. If all these polls came back and only 20% of the respondents favored the district, and we heard a lot of opposition, especially from residents and property owners, that would, have to get factored in. So
it just seems like such a mess. I mean, even at the outset, in its conception, the methodology, the reliability, how much we're going to weigh it. It would be a shame if this is the only method we could use to judge if there's a consensus for the conservation district.
Certainly looking for suggestions. So
we've also been meeting for 2 years. There's a record of all of this. Like, this isn't out of nowhere.
Right. And do you draw a conclusion, Gavin, those 2 years?
I have my own conclusions. I don't know that that's necessarily relevant right now. But, that people have the ability to look back on these meetings. They have the ability to see that there have been these meetings, that there have been comments. People have been attending these meetings. You know, people have their own opinions. If they have their opinions, they can sort of make them heard. We can all write to our city councilors if we need to.
I have a question, actually a couple of questions about the questions on the poll. And my first one is why we wouldn't be asking for people's names, because that's a counter to, you know, at least identify. You can say, oh, okay, Joe Smith says he lives at, you know, at this address, but there not only is there no Joe Smith living there, but there never has been a Joe Smith living there. So that's not a, you know, we got to stop the steal, so to speak. They've got to, sorry, Gavin. But I, at the very least, people should be willing to put their names on a poll. And then I wondered, it says comments and suggestions, but following number 3, are you in favor, yes or no? Would we want to ask why or why not, rather than just suggestions or, you know, comments or suggestions, or in addition to comments or suggestions?
Sure.
But I think the name, I think asking for people to sign and print their name would certainly be, I think that would add some value to return postcard.
Well, I agree. That would go a long way. If we could cross-reference and confirm that there were actual people living there, if they put their names down. And the city has a, what's the name of the system the city has if you want any kind of license, even a dog license? They kind of know.
Street list. They have a street list.
But they have an MIS system, a computer database where
there's a
I know I renew my dog license and they know my address.
Oh, well, there's the Cambridge Property Database, which is not always as up to date as it could be.
Okay. I was just wondering if we could cross-reference with that to ease the burden on the CHC, tabulating the.
I mean, that is a reference for citations for sure. Like I said, it's not always as current as it could be. But
you know who would have that information would be the traffic and parking for resident permits and.
Oh, very good.
Right.
Resident, yes. And they'll know
people
whether
have
or not
to
you have
submit
a
a utility bill, their name, address, and all the proof that they live where they live to get either a visitor's permit on their car or just a visitor's permit if they don't own a car. Brilliant,
Bill. That
would. How about address? Do we ask for address as well as name?
No, you get it. You can get a. You don't have to own a car.
I don't own a car, and I still get it. So.
Yes, but you have to provide proof, right, that you have a utility bill or something, and you live where you're saying you live. No, I was asking, could we include address on that with the name and address instead of just name?
In addition, yes.
Great idea.
That would alleviate some of my concerns with the general broadcasting of this mass mailing. And
me too.
Okay. What do you want to do? I mean, we've got 10 minutes. I promised Ron an hour, and
well, Ron hasn't exactly been silent, so.
But we could also take public comment on this poll. Ron, it's up to you. What do you want to do?
Yeah, no, just give me 60 seconds. I think the public comment on the poll would be very useful to hear. Okay. I just wanted to clarify perhaps we can talk about this at the next meeting, but I approached Charlie and the study committee back in January when we rebooted about my experiences and my wanting to share them. And I was told that I would be able to do so in the spring, and I wasn't. And then I was pushed off till June, and then I wasn't. And it was August after that was supposed to be when the study committee ended. And by then the draft report had long since calcified, except for, you know, minor things that have gone on the last few meetings. I didn't really see the need to present, but what I thought, I urge you all to read for next week. It's posted on the ECNCD CHC website. It's a report I prepared with my experiences with 2 different historic districts about the hidden costs, and please have a broad definition of the cost, because I'm not talking about pricing and rental. That's not my war. I just wanted to relay to everybody what I went through as a property owner trying to go through 2 historic districts, and a lot of the same dynamics that I faced would be in play here at a possible ECNCD. And I provide this report not to destroy an ECNCD, but so that I had hoped we could all be mindful of it when we decided what the scope was of how many people we were going to unduly burden, for example. And I just feel like we went through those stoplights. So I ask you all, anybody in the community, I'll be fielding questions on it next week. Maybe we can just get through that in a half an hour, but I'll cut my time short tonight. And if we have anybody in the community that wants to comment on the poll, I'll defer to them.
Okay.
I have to, I don't want to comment on the poll. I think that what was said so far is enough. I still do not understand why 2 historic districts, completely different in nature, in municipalities that do not compare with Cambridge, should be relevant in the topic of a conservation district. Are those 2 historic districts similar in nature to a conservation district? What are the definitions of the historic district of Belmont and Dennis? Furthermore, how is it that those 2 towns would compare to the type of development and renters issues that we face in Cambridge? Furthermore, East Cambridge, considering the type of development. I just would like to understand how those 2 things seem to you to compare, because to me, it's like comparing apples to oranges, and I don't understand how it is that it would be relevant.
So Francesca, have you read my report?
I have.
Okay. Well, I think it really comes down to human nature, and that we're putting human beings on these study committees and the commission. And, you know, even in an earlier proceeding, Charlie admitted that, and it's even in the report, that they're largely the same animal, historic districts and the NCDs. So I would just ask that, you know, you had tried to prevent the publication of my report in an email over the weekend, Francesca.
No, I did not.
After having it for 20 minutes. I am just
asking the same questions that I already asked publicly. So please do not put words in my mouth.
Well, I think it's all in the report, Francesca. I think it's all in the report. Like, I would just ask, I was trying to defer to the public to comment on the poll. But if you'd rather stay on this topic and the meeting, I think it'll be rushed. I think we need a good amount of time to go over the report. And I don't think it's fair to,
well, you know, since you wrote the report, I think you took the time to write the report. Yeah. I think you also know.
Okay, so let's ask one question at a time, Francesca. Can you ask me one question?
I did ask you one question.
How does it relate?
How do you think those 2 towns that have nothing that compare to Cambridge should be relevant because it's people everywhere. There's people even in towns in Africa, but it doesn't compare. The nature of a place is also determined by the economy and the demographics, which is why you rightfully asked for numbers of the demographics, because the demographics does matter when it comes down to a conservation district.
So you think?
So why is it that two towns?
Am I allowed to answer
Yes.
before it becomes, 5 questions? Do you think human nature is different from Cambridge to Belmont to Dennis? Do you think it's that different? Because the unexpected costs that I incur and the grief that I incurred really have nothing to do with the stated goals. It's all about the human. It's all about the history. It's all about the relationships. It's all about the contention that people had, or the opinions that people had, or the whims or the bad moods that people had. And the costs are all in the report. So I urge you to, for everybody to read it, and let's have at it next week, because I think that without being able to talk about what I went through, I think it's self-evident in the report. And that's all I want to say for this week.
What meeting are we having next week?
I'm sorry, next month.
Next month.
Thanks, because I wasn't planning on coming like right before Christmas.
Christmas Eve.
Okay, it's 7:56. I think the next meeting would be on, where are we? January 19th. That's the third Wednesday. So sounds like we have more to discuss. And I'll take a crack at all these things in the report that we've discussed and get that out to you on, I hope, the same schedule as we managed this time. And have a great holiday. So
thank you, Charlie, and thank you and Eric for all the work that you've done with the wordsmithing. And I actually would look forward to see, Ron, what you are able to do with the letter, if at your suggestion.
Sure. Yeah, be happy to give some input, write some copy.
Great.
And Eric, if you're listening, we hope it's nice and balmy on the beach down there on the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, see you in the new year.
Now, take a note of the hands raised, and when we get back to public comment at the next meeting, we'll be sure to ask for your opinions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.